I hope people understand a little bit better about what it is we're trying to do when we say we're doing apologetics and what it means when we say urban or street apologetics. Yes, polemics where we attack rival claims, part of it, but that can't be it, because we're actually answering questions that deal with existence. Who we are, why are we here, where are we going, who am I, what's my purpose, what else is there?
So yeah, family, we've got Vocab Malone on. But if you guys don't know, right, he's been going hard for, I don't know, I would say at least 10 years, right? I think I'm hip to Vocab Malone. He's had loads of debates, really antagonizing the Hebrew Israelites. And I'm like, wow, my brother's going out there. Sometimes it looks and appears like you're on your ones and you're going in against the Hebrew Israelites. And then I'm seeing recently you going hard against the Muslims. I think it's Farouk or something, Sheikh Farouk or somebody like that anyway. And then of course you had debates with people inside of the conscious community, to Brother Tazariak. I'm going to name the top ones anyway, Brother Tazariak and Brother Jabari. And I was like, listen, I just love your work. I love your work. And I love, I was actually looking at stuff from there's another show that you guys do. And I don't think it's your show, but I think it's linked to you as well, which is Cultish.
Oh yeah, Cultish. Yep,
Cultish on there, and you had some Kemetic brothers on, a previously Kemetic brother on, discussing some stuff, and I'm like, wow, okay, because I would say I'm part of the Kemetic community, right, or part of the conscious community, and for me, the way I see it is like a lot of them. Their arguments here are just weak and wild. And to be a Christian, to convert to anything else, right, it's the only reason why you're converting to these weak arguments, and I'm even to Muslim arguments as well, right, is because you simply don't know your Bible well, or you haven't been trained to defend the faith or defend the Christian claims, because a lot of the arguments out there are pretty much pseudo and pretty much weak, in my humble opinion. But yeah, let's go.
Well, interesting analysis. Yeah. I mean, I think sometimes when I look at Christians, sometimes I hear some bad arguments too, and then sometimes I watch my old videos and I say, "Oh, that was a bad argument too." Try to be reflective,
Mm-hmm. Vocab. Actually, let me ask you a question, right? Do you know what David Wood? You lot had the David Wood series, What was it? Muhammad's Boom Boom Room.
Yeah, there's two different main ones we did. We've done a number of one-off skits, but the serialized ones were Muhammad's Boom Boom Room.
When everyone knows I can't read.
And Islamicize Me.
Listen, Muslims, if you're looking, please, close your ears for a hot second, But I can't lie. I used to watch that, and I used to bust up in jokes, watching it. Yeah, give me some of the little voices. Give us some of the voices.
You're trying to get me murked, man. Well, it's kind of like, welcome to Muhammad's Boom Boom Room. I'm your host, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon me.
But when you criticize me, someone has to die.
I listen, family. I don't know. Are these videos still up? Because I think David Wood, did he close down his channel? Or
yeah, he did, but other people have since put them up. So they most of them are still to be found on the internet. And the idea is, if Muhammad had a talk show, how it would operate. And the way we operate it is, once a person disagrees with him or he finds something objectionable about them, he blows them up and then comes back and does it again next week.
Well, it does sound kind of bad when he says it like that.
Yeah.
It's obviously edgy. Many people would find it offensive. But it's not just sheer lunacy, I don't believe. Meaning, it's not just, hey, let's do mockery. It's listen to the content, but delivered in a memorable and hopefully humorous way. Because we cite our sources and we work on the script to make sure, even if it's lampooning it, it's reflecting something accurate.
All right. So you know what? Let me actually ask you a real obtuse question, right? Because we all know you're firm in your faith. You are a Christian. But if you wasn't a Christian, right, what other faith or religion or system out there would pique your interest to say, that could be an all right way to live life?
Okay, yeah. So I've actually thought about this a little bit. As far as what I would see as possibly, for lack of a better word, true, it would just be some sort of secular humanism, because I do think it's an all or nothing proposition, where it's like, okay, we either live in a universe and inhabited by something else other than ourselves, and I'm talking creator level, and everything that he's made, although really technically we don't call the creator part of the universe, he created it, but some sort of secular humanism. However, let's say I was the kind of secular humanist who had no scruples, where I wasn't living life on principle, but everything was strictly pragmatic, right? I could see joining up with some religions strictly for the societal benefits. Let's say I was a secular humanist in what I actually believed. I didn't believe anything existed except for us, But if I was in Utah, it would be very helpful to be a Mormon, and could be kind of fun. If I was in a lot of countries in the Middle East, or perhaps Dearborn, Michigan, maybe be a Muslim, because there's societal benefits. Now, I don't think that's the kind of secular humanist I would be if I was a secular humanist. I think I would be the kind that would stand on principles, and wouldn't be able to do any of that, because if I'm trying to maintain who I am still in some sense, although I would have a lot of vexing questions, because I don't feel like secular humanism ultimately answers the most important things. When I say secular humanism, I kind of basically mean atheism, but I'm saying the way that it would actually function. It would just function very man-centered, very us on this earthly existence plane centered. That's all there would be to it. I do not hear the claims of any other religions and think that they have any chance or shot of being true, except for Christianity. Except for one, which is Judaism. Meaning, if we're really, really wrong about Jesus being the Messiah, I still could say the Old Testament is true, but there's big hurdles there too, because I believe that the timeline for the Messiah to come is sort of expired. And so I believe it would cause problems for the book's claims and what it pointed to for the people. And within that Judaism, the other problem is, if I was going to embrace that or something, the other challenge would be what form. Modern day Judaism is not like Judaism in the first century in very serious, substantial ways. So I actually gave more than one answer, but I guess if it was a religion and it was based upon principle, it would be Judaism. If it was not a religion, but a worldview strictly based upon principle, it would be secular humanism. But if I was a secular humanist without any scruples, I would just do what everyone else was doing.
Okay.
But these are very hypothetical, man.
So also, right, because I know you get it in with the debates. And I want to know, out of all the great debaters you've debated with, right? First of all, who is your top 3 debaters, and who do you think gave you your run for your money?
I'm going to say I debated Richard Carrier.
Mm-hmm.
And Richard Carrier, he's a bibliophile. And, his memory is just like a index of information. And he has that strange, nerdy confidence that can throw you off, even if you know what you're talking about, and even if you heartily disagree with the propositions. So that's a real challenge to debate someone like Richard Carrier, because he says so much in such a little time with such confidence, some of it sourced, and you are trying to communicate with the audience, and that can be difficult. So very challenging. And honestly, there's a guy here locally. He went to Arizona State University. He did philosophy for his undergrad. And he was the kind of guy that would basically literally take notes on everything you were saying. He's a hardcore atheist. But every time he came back, he would be more difficult to deal with, because he would adjust his arguments and questions based upon what you talked about last time. And so he was very perceptive and had a lot of very interesting questions. I debated him a couple times in public. If anybody really wants to search, you look Vocab Malone, Spencer Hawkins. His public debates are just okay. It's more like in conversation though, that he's an interesting guy because he would go after fellow atheists. So he went after these kind of people that got into like this evidentiary nature of epistemology, like positivism. For example, like he really went after Matt Dillahunty, especially Aaron Ra. So, he would even go after them saying, no, you guys got it wrong. So very, very smart guy. So difficult in regular conversation. Those are two. I don't know. I'm trying to think of a third. So I got Richard Carrier and my buddy Spencer Hawkins, difficult. Some are difficult, not because they're good debaters, but because they don't have any decorum or protocol. So I guess you're talking about people, I guess, on an intellectual level, probably, right?
Yeah.
Not people who is different. Yeah.
But let's get into the muck though. Like, actually, no, that debate wasn't mucky at all though. Tazariak debate. How was that?
That was great. Yeah, that wasn't. I mean, he was. We kind of had fun. Here and there. It wasn't like super personal. He didn't yell. We just had a couple jabs here and there, but we discussed the issues. So I thought it was a great debate. It wasn't very, messy, for lack of a better word. I thought it was a great debate. And we debated the virgin birth. The idea is Jesus the biological son of Joseph? That was what we debated, Kalaam. And I think the position is ultimately indefensible, but I guess he gives enough credence to that position with his confidence and certain things that if you were a Hebrew Israelite, I guess it could satisfy you.
Yeah.
But I think an atheist who hates the Bible can read the Bible and say, these people are claiming this guy was born of a virgin. I think it's so incredibly explicit. You don't have to believe it to understand that's clearly what's being claimed. Even if you think, well, only Matthew and Luke claim it and it's not anywhere else, like Bill Maher, you should include the virgin birth everywhere. He made fun of that in Religious, I remember. But you at least understand someone's claiming it pretty strongly there. And you also, if you take a look at early church history, if it's any indicator of what they thought was going on, these people are virgin birth left and right. It wasn't one of the things that was really being debated. It was so incredibly clear that was a claim, except for pagan critics. Like Kelsa said, actually, he had a Roman father named Pantera, and they just made this thing up, But that was a pagan critic. He still understood the claim. He was just kind of like poking holes at the narrative.
That's true. Okay. Yeah. That was very interesting debate because with Tazariak, it's his, how can I put it? It's his confidence and his swag that pulls the audience his way, I would say. But anybody that is kind of hip to the actual argumentation itself would be like, huh? Why? I didn't know. Anyways, it's
well, yeah.
Let me not talk.
There's whole swaths of my argument he literally did not touch at all, especially the stuff with the language and the grammar.
Mm-hmm.
That the stuff with the language and the grammar that I brought up was not irrelevant. It was part and parcel to the case of what these folks are saying. So if someone's going to debate the English words like they were prone to do, it's like, okay, let's look at what they're saying in the original language. And it's absolutely definitive and I showed that, and he literally never touched it. He never touched anything to do with the grammar, never touched anything to do with the language. And I'm not saying he has to be a Greek expert. I don't claim to be a Greek expert, but there has to be some facility with what's happening underneath if you're making this claim. And it's just whole swaths of the argumentation he literally just left untouched.
Do you think that certain groups just kind of live in their own bubble and don't take into a broader consideration of what scholarship is actually saying on these topics?
Yeah, and that can, of course, happen with anybody, anywhere, anytime, any place, right? But you increase your chances of that kind of bubble of ignorance when you purposefully discount anyone from the outside. So, oh, well, we can't believe him because he's the genetic fallacy. Or a lot of times these guys racialize it, right? Well, that's not an Israelite scholar. He's the wrong ethnicity. So unless it's convenient, of course, and they use it. So that's a real problem. Now, we don't, scholarship, right? What is scholarship? That's an interesting question itself. And when people say scholarship, there's a lot of questions. Almost any question you raise, scholars are arguing over or have argued over in any field, right? So, we're talking about biblical scholarship probably mainly, but you look at every field and you're like, oh, evolution, the lumpers and the splitters. Oh, the out of Africa thesis. Oh, you used to look at it like, oh, okay, this is just everywhere. Well, it's similar in biblical studies, no doubt. And so it's not, I don't think we can have our whole worldview rise and fall upon that. But we should take these things into account, and we shouldn't embrace things that are literally logically impossible. They're contradictions. They cannot be the case. Now, I know if you got people who don't believe the Bible, they'd say, well, that's what you do, Vocab. But it's an interesting thing. What is logically possible? Because there's things that would seem physically irregular, but doesn't mean they're logically impossible. Here's what I mean by that. If a God exists who created the world, miracles are not logically impossible. They would be physical irregularities. They would be irregular from the way the things normally run, but they're not logical contradictions. It's not a logical contradiction to say the God who made the universe can enable one of his creatures to come back from the dead, for example. This is not a logical impossibility. Doesn't mean it's normative, and it doesn't mean it's standard, but it's not logically a contradiction. Anyways, I would say some of the things that there's things people believe that are literally untenable. They cannot be the case, but I think scratches an itch for them maybe, so they don't want to give it up.
And I want to know, because I was watching back. I'm not too sure how many encounters you had with Jabari, but I think I watched one encounter that you had with Jabari, and there was another what's his name?
Adam Coleman?
Yeah, I believe so. I believe it's Coleman. I think it was both of you on Sarnet TV. Actually, before I go on to that, shouts out to Brother Garfield. The debate with Brother Tazariak and Brother Vocab Malone was on that particular channel. I'm sure you can find it also on Vocab Malone's channel. Yeah. But I just want to give a shout out to Garfield for actually putting in that work and actually, facilitating the debate. And the moderator as well was that the debate I think he watched? I think he had somebody else moderating that debate. Is that true?
Yeah, he had Corey. Yeah, Corey was the host or moderator.
And that was pretty good as well. So yeah, shouts out to Garfield and all the work that he's doing as well. So yeah, the argument. Okay, I was a bit upset with that conversation, right? Because for me, sorry, Jabari. I actually love you, Jabari. I'm just going to say this, though. I have to say this, right? I just felt as though that he wasn't answering your questions and he wasn't able to defend the Kemetic position. And he didn't put forward a Kemetic position, as far as I remember in the conversation. So I want to know, is this something that's kind of regular when you have conversations with Kemetics themselves?
I think when some of the Kemetic spokespeople, say on the internet, catch traction, sometimes it's not necessarily the promotion of their own worldview. A lot of times it seems like maybe it's more the polemical side, criticizing mainly, especially Christianity. Mm-hmm. And they can kind of function as critics of Christianity. And people can say, oh, look at that. That's not as easy as defending a position, setting forth a comprehensive case. With the Kemetic guys, I do not feel like their worldview is very systematized. And what I mean by that is it doesn't always seem very comprehensive to me. And when I say systematized, I don't just mean, oh, that's Eurocentrism. What I mean is it's not logically connected as it should be. That's what it seems like to me. It seems like there's problems with, okay, well, if this is your view of individual identity, and yet this is your view of the universe, and this is your view of morality, and yet this is your view of what's underneath everything here, I'm not sure how these things all go together. And my goodness, I don't know if a lot of the guys have thought about it. There's a lot of people who haven't thought about it, and there's always unanswered questions. So I'm trying to be sympathetic, but it just seems like there's not a lot of deep thought into it. And sometimes it almost sounds like just people making claims about magic. You know, if you meditate, then you can levitate. And if we free our minds, then we'll be able to communicate with extraterrestrials. And we know that the ancient Egyptian gods actually were alien visitors. And, you know, I know not everyone has all those positions. I understand that, but I'm just saying, okay, but what's your totality of your worldview? And is it logically comprehensive? And does it hang together? Is it consistent? You know, and is it practical? You know, and sometimes I don't feel like that's the case. And it's difficult, you know, because if I tell you I'm a Reformed Christian, I can tell you, go read the London Baptist Confession of 1689, and you'll know a lot of what I believe doctrinally. Reading negative confessions doesn't really tell you what a person really believes. So it's like, I think things in writing or things like, I think it helps, because then it solidifies you and cements you at a position that then it is attackable. It's defeatable. But I feel like a lot of guys and groups in the conscious community get by with not having any of that laid out, and everything's a secret, and I'll tell you later, and all that kind of. And you're like, what are you actually defending here, other than just being a gadfly in the ointment of Christianity? Because that's not really a worldview. That's how I feel sometimes. If what I'm saying makes sense to the audience, I hope it does.
100%. I think it should make sense, because I just think that with Muslims, for example, they've had time to how can I put it, hone in their attacks, honing their defense over, I don't know, 1,000 years of interfacing with Christians. And the same with Christians against Muslims. And then recently, atheists, they've come from a Christian paradigm and they're against the Christian God. So they tend to have better argumentations. And when I look into the conscious community, and especially the Kemetic community, I'm like, come on, man. Like, at least put forward something. What do you stand for? And it just takes so long to actually get to the bottom of what exactly you stand for. What is it that you hold to be true? What is your creed, basically? And yeah, it's just not easy. And I was watching again, I think it was D New. I think he was an ex-Kemetic.
Oh, you're talking about DMG, the poet, Pianki.
Yes, Pianki. There you go. And I'm like, I feel you, because you have so much, zeitgeist claims about Christianity. And I'm like, it just lets me know you have spent no time in biblical scholarship, investigating any of these claims. And it's very detrimental, I think, for the conscious community to put forward claims that you yourself haven't investigated, because you will start turning people away from the conscious community, one, or you will just make the conscious community look like a bunch of quack jobs, two. That's just the way I see it.
Well, I'm not going to argue with you there. But, you still find yourself being part of the conscious community. There must be some thinkers or groups that you feel are doing the job, don't you? Don't you got somebody you can point to? And
I would say, for the things that I'm interested in, right? Actually, for the conscious community, no. There's a lot of it. To me, it just seems like a whole heap of pseudo stuff. Full stop. Majority of it, 99% of it. There are my fan favorites, right? So my fan favorites are people like Asai Imhotep, Smash Rockwell, and Brother Reggie. I would say those are my three favorites inside of the conscious community. The reason being, Asai Imhotep, he actually does the work. He puts forward scholarship. He actually writes articles and he writes books. So you know his position, you know what he stands for. You can see the development of his argumentations. You're like, okay, cool. I'm down with that. Okay. The rest of them, they don't write one. They don't put forward arguments in terms of verbally speaking, putting forward a good argument too. And most of them aren't read on an academic level. So most of them, no, I don't follow in that respect. No.
Oh, man, you're they might disown you after this.
Yeah, they may, and I say it a lot, especially at Speaker's Corner. Like, they always ask me like, why you've been gone from Speaker's Corner and and also like not posting up stuff with the conscious community. And I'm like, you know what? To me, it just seems like Speaker's Corner and the conscious community, forgive me, seems like a lot of people are just suffering from mental health problems. And that's what it is. It's their place to go on, Speaker's Corner to vent their frustrations that they have in life, but they're using their religion to do it. Or they come online on YouTube world to do the same thing. It's just a lot of, how can I put it? Aggressiveness with pseudo-intellectualism. That's what I call it.
Well, that does characterize a lot of things that I see and hear. And, hey, we're all for passion. But, people will kind of put almost any behavior under the word passion. You don't understand a passion. It's like, well, you can't just define everything as passion, because that just looks like you have no control of your temper and you don't know how to argue, so you just threaten instead.
And speaking on Speaker's Corner, right? Would you attend Speaker's Corner?
Yeah, I would go to Speaker's Corner. Hopefully I'd make it out without getting stabbed, but yeah, I'd go.
Okay. So do you actually link up with people like Jay Smith out there in America?
At a couple conferences. I've done 2 or 3 conferences with Jay Smith, and we always like to listen to him because he's got this voice when he's on the microphone.
Yeah.
And he does this one talk where he goes, Islam and Christianity, it's about a man and a book. We have our man, they have their man. We have our book, they have our book. Let's look at the man. Now let's look at the book. A man and a book. He's a funny guy, though. He's actually pretty cool in person. Like Jay Smith is. Yeah, he's a cool guy. He's got some interesting arguments and positions. I don't go along with him on the Muhammad never existed thing and some of that stuff. But I love listening to him, and he always brings out new information. I feel like he's cutting edge, stuff he's doing. And he's certainly labored in a very unique field that a lot of people would not be willing to do, being out Speaker's Corner and a number of other things over the years. So I really appreciate him and all that. But he's someone that I mainly run into at conferences and where he's speaking and I'm doing something. And he seems to have a good memory because he remembers me and we have little chats and stuff like that. Yeah. But
let me shout Jay Smith, Jay Smith, if you're watching this, I love you, my bro. I love you 100%. I remember I used to, when I was studying Islam very, very hard, like going in depth, looking at the origins of Islam. I remember looking at his videos, a couple of his videos outside. It's like in a I don't know, lecture hall type. I don't know, long time ago. And I was like, yeah, this man's on point. This man's on point. 2-2s. I'm at Speaker's Corner. I'm hearing him speak. I didn't even put it together that this is Jay Smith on the video and this is Jay Smith live in person. I didn't even know. I didn't even have a clue. I just knew that whatever he's saying, I love it. I resonated with it. I think with me and him, we went out. We had dinner together. And he's always looked out. He's always like been down. Like if I asked him to do something, he would do it. He's helped me up put some debates of organized debates he got from, I don't know, I think it was a church he was doing it with Adnan Rashid or somebody like that. No, James White versus Adnan Rashid, I think it was.
Oh.
He basically got me the footage to put it on my channel before everybody else. So
Wow.
he was able to have that footage, and I was like, yo, listen, I love you. Yeah. Also, YouTube. I took him down to YouTube Studio. I still haven't released these videos. Big interviews with Jay Smith in the YouTube Studio, and that was just like exciting time. So shout out to Jay Smith, because you've always looked out for me and you're always down. So salute to you. Yeah,
But yeah, I'd love to see those interviews. I'm sure they're fire.
trust me. Whew. All right, let's go into this now, because I know you got a presentation, yeah, and I know we've been talking for at least a hot minute. So I want to know what's the presentation you got in store for us.
Well, I wanted to briefly talk about what urban apologetics is. What it is I do, because even the reason I did this, it's not the most exciting or controversial thing, is because even when I was setting up the debate with Tazaryak, he was like, I still don't understand why you call yourself a street apologist. What do you apologize on the street? And after all this time, it's unclear.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, maybe we need to talk a little bit about it. What is urban apologetics? And I think it'll help explain to the outside world, what it is we're trying to do when we do these debates and have these discussions and all that. So let's take a look here. There's some books I wrote, blah, blah, blah. Forget about all that.
Okay. Let me hold you for 1 second. Family tree. Yeah. You know what I need you guys to do. First of all, if you've just joined us, make sure you hit the like button. Yeah. Hit the like button. And of course, I need you guys to just share this like crazy. Go to your Facebooks, your WhatsApps, your Instagrams, I don't know, wherever you are at, that you're active. Please just hit the share button, share it to a ton of people, because we've got Vocab Malone on the show live right now. He's on the hot seat, going in Street Apologetics. Let's get it, baby. Let's go.
Yes, indeed. Here. Let's go.
There you go. I need something like that.
Well, you got that background, man. It looks great. Okay, so in an American context, when I talk about urban apologetics in the city, I'll do a brief overview of the basic swath of American history, especially Black American history. And there's a lot more to say, but here's some of what I'll talk about. And sometimes when I give this presentation, it's really for people who have no clue. So these are like outsiders, like Christians who are interested in apologetics but don't know much about it, and they know even less about urban apologetics. I'm not going to do the whole thing there. The audience, I think, would be bored partially because I think a lot of the audience would have an understanding of the basic overview of history. And obviously this could be critiqued. Someone's going to say, why'd you start there? I understand. It's just a slide. Pastor Craig Thompson, Ordinary Christian Podcast. There was a time when urban culture was limited to the inner city. That is no longer the case. Urban culture has spread far beyond the inner city. Urban culture is being exported out of the city center. Ideas and ideologies are shared via social media and blogs. You don't have to travel to find urban culture. Urban culture has come to you. Urban apologetics is needed in a world, and here he's specifically actually talking about the book on the screen, but it also means the larger thing in general. In a world that is shaped by urban culture, Christians must confront urban culture with the gospel of Jesus Christ. Jesus doesn't exchange urban culture for white culture or indigenous culture for American culture. Jesus redeems culture for his own glory and for the good of his people. That sentence right there, the last sentence that the pastor wrote, is important. That's why I clipped this, is actually mainly for that. There has been a mistake, especially from European context during the age of colonialism and right after it, where people go into cultures and say, hey, let me tell you about Jesus. And by the way, you need to change everything about yourself. Rename yourself Bob, wear this tie. And, it's actually kind of sad. It's like a destruction of people's culture in the name of Christianity, but that's never what was supposed to happen. So it's a real travesty. It's a real shame. It's a shame. It's sad. Christianity is not supposed to be cultural imperialism. It's not supposed to be anything like that. And that's why that sentence is so important. Jesus doesn't exchange urban culture for white culture or indigenous culture for American culture. That's not what it's supposed to be about. I just want to really emphasize that. What does Jesus do, though? Redeems culture for his own glory and for the good of his people. Listen, I understand everyone who watching doesn't share my worldview, but understand what Christians teach and what I think is a beautiful truth that I hope you can see the power in, even if you don't believe in this Bible. God has created everyone, and he made them in the image of God, and they bear forth his image in the diverse ways that they represent and create culture. And therefore, Christians, as following the second greatest commandment according to Jesus, which is to love your neighbor as yourself, respect and cherish all types of cultures and don't look at one as any better. Now, that's a separate issue from issues of sin or degradation that creep into all cultures. And that's what Jesus redeems, because yes, the gospel is for the individual, but the gospel is also for the society, for the culture. Here, let me go to the next slide. Let's define this a little bit more when you talk about urban apologetics, because I guess I'm an urban apologist or street apologist, take your pick. And here's what it says here. Let's define this here. Urban apologetics is a cultural apologetic. It is a division of Christian apologetics that engages the unique challenges of faith plaguing the African American, and I put this in brackets because I think it's important. This gets left out, so the white brackets are mine, and Latino community with the informative answers palatable to the African American and Latino experience. Now, this is obviously written from an American context, but this could apply with just some slight alteration to other contextual context as well. And that's a quote from Zion McGregor in the Urban Apologetics book. So I'm looking at a couple of different definitions here. This is my man, BK Apologist. I love what he says here. Urban apologetics defined. Look at this. Defending the gospel against heretical teachings that target black and brown people. I like that. That's a simple, straightforward one. And I think that's a pretty dope little definition there. Now let's talk about some of the concerns within this context. You know, what animates us? Let's look at some of the concerns here. And again, I've added in brackets here what I think is important to add. This is from a website, thefrontporch.org. The questions answered by black and brown religions and cults have a great deal to do with the sojourn and suffering of black and brown people in the United States. And again, I think you can leave out that word United States, and it can be applicable in other places, but these are two Americans writing. Before the religious claims become intellectual or purely theological, they are first existential. If we fail to understand this dynamic and genius of black and brown religion, then we fail the apologetic task at the start. The challenge to Christianity is to prove its power and relevance by answering the fundamental question rather than simply debunking the rival claim. Now, this is not always easy. It's saying yes. At least this is my understanding of what Isaac at the Beatty are writing here. And briefly talked at the Beatty. I once went to Isaac's church there in D.C. Never actually got to talk to him yet. But anyways, and I heard Isaac preach, though. Saying this, yes, polemics where we attack rival claims is part of it. But that can't be it, because we're actually answering questions that deal with existence. Who we are. Why are we here? Where are we going? Who am I? What's my purpose? What else is there? All that stuff. And that's my layman's way to talk about the existential. You mentioned the word existential there. What are some pressing concerns within this? Concerns of origins. A lot of this has overlap with just sort of regular apologetics, but I'm focusing in on these. Questions of identity, questions of suffering and evil, questions of community well-being, questions of history, and in this context, U.S. history, and what people call race relations. So let's take a look at urban apologetics mission, what it is that's supposed to happen, what it is we're supposed to do, what it is we're supposed to be after. Well, the Great Commission. So let me give some good old Christian theological terminology here to the audience. The Great Commission is what we call what Jesus said at the end of the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew is the first book found in the New Testament, and its account of Jesus's ministry, a little bit about his birth, but it's mainly 2.5, 3 years of his ministry. And Matthew goes to great lengths to show how this mission, this man connects to the Old Testament Hebrew scriptures, but then he points forward, specifically at the end of the book. At the end of Matthew 28, Matthew records Jesus Christ as saying, go, emphasize that, go into all the world. Go into all the world, make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And it says, teach them whatever I have commanded you. And then it ends, it says in the KJV, lo, I am with you even into the end of the age. That's the Great Commission. This mission that Jesus sends his disciples and followers out into the greater world to make disciples, not of us, not of our nation, not of our group, no, of Jesus Christ, meaning they act, think, live like him. And if everyone did that, this world would be a different place. And half the time, more than that, I'm sure, we understand that we Christians don't do it, or people that bear the name of Christ. We understand that. But that's the goal. That's the goal, because he is worthy, and he is the only one who is worthy. And so that is the mission. So the Great Commission gives all apologetics its mission, meaning what's the point of clarifying, defending the Christian faith in the public square? What's the point of giving rational, logical answers for the hope that lies inside you, according to 1 Peter 3:15? What's the point of saying, no, that's not true? Here's what's true. What's the point of that? There's an ultimate goal. Here's what it is. Apologetics will never lose its relevance as long as it is always connected to the act of answering the questions that the people we are evangelizing, that means sharing the gospel with, that means sharing the truth about who Jesus is with, are asking of our faith. Most believers would agree that the number one reason why Christians don't actively share their faith with others is because of the fear of being asked a question that they cannot answer. Apologetics, along with biblical and theological training, alleviates much of this concern. And that's from Biola Magazine, the sources on the screen, Christopher Brooks from Detroit. The point is that ultimately, we're to share the gospel about who Jesus is, and hopefully people agree and make him Lord. And that's a supernatural miracle when that happens, meaning it's not of our own willpower. God acts upon the human in a miraculous way to enable them to trust him. That's our theological understanding of what happens. But our job is to share, and hopefully not just with our lips, but with our lives. And the idea is apologetics is part and parcel of the mission of evangelism, because evangelism just comes from a word that means good news. So let's talk about some of the functions here. The functions. Now, I know on this screen, you cannot really read that. I understand that. I apologize, but I will tell you what it says. It's just the way it converted. And this is from Pastor Eric Mason, an article he wrote called Why We Need Urban Apologetics. Urban apologetics also dispels and addresses the multitude of urban legends, historical myths, theological fallacies, exegetical improprieties, scientific misnomers, sociological revisionism, spiritual synchronism, and reductionist views of Christianity that exist in the Black, and I'm going to add brown, communities. That's good. And we're talking about urban apologetics, yes, but what he just said there could go with any segment of society or culture. We're just being specific here. We're being culturally contextual here. But isn't that good? Because, I mean, quite a few of those do exist within the Kemetic community. Much respect. No, I love y'all. And here's what he says here. Eric Mason in Philly. Much of what we combat in urban apologetics are arguments that were once popular in previous generations and are now re-emerging with an ethnic slant. 16 Saviors, I'm looking at you. James Fraser, Golden Bough, I'm looking at you. Christ mythicism, I'm looking at you. Egyptology, I'm looking at you. For example, we're seeing a reemergence of the theory that Christianity is a copy of an Egyptian religion, an issue that was addressed and dispelled decades ago. That's from Mason's article at keylife.org. Now let's take a look at a couple more here. We don't got too much more longer here. What do we do, right? What do we do? How do we do it? Here's what we're supposed to do. Identify, engage, and dispel false, dangerous errors. This is obviously on an ideological level. That's what we're talking about here. We're not talking about applying Sharia or Christian nationalism. We're talking about on an ideological, spiritual, theological level. That's what we're talking about here. So what is a dangerous idea? Where is it gaining popularity? Let's engage with it. Let's dispel it. Debunk unique BRIC errors. BRIC is an urban apologist acronym. I don't know who came up with it, by the way. So I did not come up with it, but shout out to whoever did. And it stands for Black Brown Religious Identity Cults. I almost think like whoever came up with it did it definitely a lot to kind of describe what Hebrew Israelism is, but I know it's not the only one. Debunk unique BRIC errors, related doubts, because there's also doubts that come in here, right? When we talk about this, doubts. I don't say doubts. I mean doubts about Christianity. Now, I'm gonna actually skip this, but I could tell you what this says though. This is a short version. A lot of people are leaving the churches and plenty of it's our fault. So I'm not sitting around whining. And that includes black and brown people. And there's some stats and articles to talk about it. That's basically what it is. And the question is, what are the reasons? And I have some of the reasons on the screen. So it is Zion. Okay, shout out to Zion. By the way, Zion McGregor, everybody, just so we understand who we're talking about here. Not Zion Lex. Shout out to Zion McGregor. He came up with it. I like that. That's good. Okay, so give him credit. Here's some of the ideologies. Some of the ideologies, because it said identify them. Moorish Science Temple, Kemetic Science, Nations of God's Earth, Hebrew Israelism, Nation of Islam, Afrocentrism, Black Atheism, Progressive Christianity. Now, lastly, I give people some tips for how to do this. And this is what we're supposed to do, folks. This is a little slide with a quote, and it basically just says, you have to know the Bible. You got to be biblically literate. And that's a never-ending journey. No one's completed that. But that has to be a very serious mission of yours. All right? And it's saying here, I'm just going to paraphrase this because I'm going to kind of wind down here with the presentation part. Basically, just saying, don't answer questions that aren't relevant. Answer the questions that are being asked, and that means you got to know the questions. That's what Brittany Brown is saying there. Shout out to her. Then I give some resources. These are some great books. Urban Apologetics, that was an earlier book with the same title but a different subtitle by Christopher Brooks. It deals with different issues. And then that was Urban Apologetics. This is volume 2. I've been quoting prior to this from volume 1. So there's 2 of these edited by Eric Mason. These are by Usry. I always have problems pronouncing his name, but he's a pastor, and Craig Keener. These are older resources, but they're so good. So there's just 4 I'm going to throw out. And then there's some example of urban apologists. Got Damon Richardson, Adam Coleman. He's been on this platform, by the way. Shout out to him. BK, Miss Titus 2, and there's so many more. And with that, I'll end that. I hope people understand a little bit better about what it is we're trying to do when we say we're doing apologetics, and what it means when we say urban or street apologetics. Just wanted to try to briefly explain that so people understand. When we say apologetics, that's the field, the science, the art, the discipline, and an apologist is one who practices or engages in that. So when you say apologetics, you're talking about a subject, a field, right, of study. When you say apologist, you're talking about the practitioner. So that's important, because sometimes I hear people make a little mistake there with how they identify things. And it's something that's been around forever. Yes, in the Old Testament, in subtle ways. For example, Exodus clearly contains polemics against the gods of Egypt with the plagues and even other ancient Near Eastern deities in the book of Genesis. And there's more than that, but I'll just give a quick example there. A good book on that is Oswald's Bible Among the Myths. New Testament, similar, especially when you look at Paul and the epistles, even looking at Titus, and Jude, you see those things as well. Then you get real quick into the early church, people having to defend what they believe, So Justin Martyr, people perhaps have heard that name. Justin Martyr, you can read something he has called Dialogue with Trypho the Jew. And he's discussing Old Testament prophecies by Jesus, if he fulfilled them, is he truly the Messiah, things like that. Justin Martyr's, I believe it's First Apology, where he, I think, writes a letter to the emperor. And, this was a thing Christians would do. They would write these kind of open letters and be like, hey, could you guys stop persecuting us? We're not really so bad. We pray for you. Yes, we won't bow down to your statues, but can't we still live peaceably, because we're not going to set fire to the city, we promise. And and by the way, our religion is true. Let me give you some examples. And by the way, your religion is false. I'll give you some examples. This is the kind of thing they would do. From Tertullian, who was trained as a lawyer, so a lot of polemics from him. Origen, more of a scholarly kind of academic, but the reason why I mentioned earlier a guy named Celsus, or Celsus, sometimes he's called, the reason why we have his writings, which is sometimes called pure doctrine, sometimes people call Celsus' writings pure doctrine, or a term similar to that, is because Origen preserved his critique of Christianity and then responded to it. And so that's why we even know it exists. And that's just within the first 300 years. Augustine did some similar things. He was in more of a different context, where the debates were more among professing Christians at that point. And I'm skipping over a whole bunch of stuff, like people who dealt with the Gnostics, people who dealt with the Judaizers, people who dealt with the Docetists. These are all early, what we understand to be as heresies and bad ideas. And you also do find the Christians criticizing the gods of Rome, criticizing the Greek gods, criticizing them, saying these are false gods, and making an invitation No, they didn't call it dawa, but making an invitation to come to the true school of philosophy, as Justin Martyr call it, which is to study under Christ and to do that. And so it's always been around, and it's not a denomination. It's not a specific kind of Christian. It's not even mentioned in the Bible as far as that person's an apologist. It comes from, as I mentioned earlier, and this is the last thing I'll say about this little spiel, 1 Peter 3:15, where Peter instructs the readers of his epistle there to always be prepared to give a defense or a reason. And the Greek word there is apologia. So he says, always be prepared to give an apologia so that you may give a reason for the hope that is inside you. Do so with gentleness and respect. So he's saying that you want to give a reasoned defense for what you believe. And the Greek word's apologia because it means reasoned defense. And so that's where the apologetics term comes from. Because really, there's apologists and apologetics for all kinds of things. It's just kind of commonly associated with Christians. But sometimes you'll hear people like say it's a sports team. Oh, you're just being a Manchester United apologist. Whatever they do is right. Whatever they do is right. You just, no matter what it is, every now and then you'll hear that in other phrases. That's kind of an insulting kind of way, though, because it indicates you're a shill. But nonetheless, you sometimes will hear it. But yeah, that's what I wanted to present. And I appreciate you allowing me to do it on here today, sir.
100%. So you know what? Let me just ask you a quick fire questions here in terms of apologetic works, right? So I want to get into some of these false and dangerous beliefs within inside of these Black identity movements. Yeah, okay, let's go. So are you telling me that Christianity is not the white man's religion?
Well, white man can definitely be in it. But it's not the white man's religion, and in no way is it. And when I say that, here's what I mean. The Hebrew writings are primarily written in a place on the earth that is not Europe. And the people, as far as on the human level that are doing the writings, are not European. And if we're going to get into phenotypes, it would be unlikely that very many of them would be able to be described as fair in any meaningful way. Meaning, you would say, if we're going to use modern terminology, you might talk about pigmentation or melanated or something like that. But it's not Europeans. It's a totally different context. It has nothing to do with that, really. You see very little, if anything, Europe even really mentioned in the Hebrew scriptures. Towards the end, you get into a little Greece and all that. Okay, like in the book of Joel, no doubt. Now, by the time you get to the New Testament, there's a 400-year gap between when the Old Testament closes, beginning of the Greek Empire there, and then now you have the Roman Empire, of course. Obviously, that'd be a European power. But when you read the scripture, there's something that scholars have noticed that actually is anti-imperial. I'm not saying that Christians said they're going to destroy or terrorize Rome, but there's this emphasis on Jesus as Lord, amongst other things, calling him king, all kinds of things that would be and could be understood within the political context of the day to be challenging the authority of Caesar. And indeed, that was the charge they tried to get Jesus on, where he's not a friend to Caesar, which was a technical term at that time. That caught Pilate's attention. He didn't care if he claimed to be a Messiah or whatever else. So, wait, a king with a kingdom? And that's exactly the kind of questions Pilate was asking Jesus in John 18 when they had their conversation. My point by saying all this, what's Jesus? Well, he's a Hebrew. He's a Jewish person. He's an Israelite living in a land where, yes, it's his land, but he's essentially part of an oppressed minority. They had shipped in people from out of town. There's something called the Decapolis, which are 10 Greek cities that were literally on Israel right there, such as Sephora. And then you have Roman soldiers running around. If you don't do what they say, bad things can happen to you. And it's a whole mess where, these folks don't even have the ability to execute capital punishment if they want. That's taken out of their hands. Now, sometimes you'll have mob rule and stuff like that. In Acts, you see that, but they don't even have the ability to do that their own self. So and then people are cooperating with these powers. Now, it's not all about that, because when you come out on the other side, regardless of what any exclusivist or ethnocentric claim makes, you do have a message that is for the whole world. But all those original disciples, they're all Hebrews, they're all Jews, they're all Israelites, and they're going out into the larger world with a message about Israel's Messiah. And that's just a fact. And the first places they go, yeah, you see Rome, you see Greece, But you see heavy emphasis on North Africa. See heavy emphasis on that. Acts 18:24-28, the Bible says that a Jew from Alexandria came over. And if you read the account, basically he wrecked shop debating the Pharisees and stuff like that in the synagogue of his day. He's an Alexandrian Jew, and he's an African Jew. The Ethiopian who's converted in Acts chapter 9. All the people mentioned in Acts chapter 2. These are not a bunch of white folks by any stretch of the imagination. So I understand on this side, people will say it because of basically in a post-colonial world. I don't even think if you lived prior to colonialism, if you said something like that, any version of that, no one would know what you're talking about. They wouldn't even understand why the argument could even potentially have merit, because they would say, what are you talking? It got to Europe way later. And what are you talking about? They didn't, it's not even on their continent where these things happen. What are you talking about? But in a post-colonial world, because most of the colonial powers in some way were spreading some version of what they understood to be Christendom, because of that, it has resonance or power. And I'm not saying it's true. I try to be sympathetic to people that say it, maybe if they legitimately mean it, especially if they're saying, I feel like if I become a Christian, I've got to unadopt my own culture. I'm sensitive to that. And I try to emphasize earlier, that's not what's supposed to happen. That's not what it's about. And also that, we get bad mixes when we get the interests of empire mixed in with the interests of what is supposed to be something that is building a kingdom that is not of this world. That's what Jesus said. Yeah, I got a kingdom, but it's not of the world. And that's what we're building. We're not here, building a political empire or anything like that. Well, when that gets conflated or that reality gets ignored, when I say conflated, I mean interest of temporal empire mixed in together with what are supposed to be eternal interests, right? When you conflate those, or when you forget the fact that we render unto Caesar what's Caesar's, but render to God what's God's. There's two separate spheres of authority, and obviously one trumps the other. So we're not mixing and matching and blending these things together like was done, especially in the so-called Holy Roman Empire. So I mentioned colonialism, but obviously as early as the Holy Roman Empire, there's some real problems there. Basically, ever since, now people might misunderstand here, I'm not saying Constantine invented Christianity, but ever since he had the Edict of Toleration, there were problems where you had these interests blending together. And it really came to a head with what you see done under colonialism. So that's all reality. But, the world's bigger than just Europe and what they did. The whole time, the Ethiopians are having church. The Syriacs are having church. The Copts in Egypt are having church. The Iraqis are having church. All these people groups are having church. And now in 2023, people in Latin America are having church. And it's not just a bunch of white people. And indeed, the future of Christianity is definitely not in Europe and in the West. It's definitely in other places. And so, no, it's not the white man's religion, but I would be a fool to deny that people have used Christianity, used the Bible as unfairly, wrongfully, but as a weapon in the cause of colonialism and imperialism and white supremacy. Obviously, I wouldn't deny that that has happened. But the question is, was that justly done? Meaning, does that fit? Does it go together? Is it right? Or was it unjustly done? Obviously, it was unjustly done. I don't think it in any way comports with actually what the Bible is saying we should do or how it should be. Remember, love your neighbor as yourself. That's a really big one. And neighbors don't go conquer neighbors and take their wives and split up their families and force them to change their names because they can't say the name or something like that, right? So no, it's not. But at the same time, I think Christians should be sensitive to when people say that and at least have an understanding. But last thing I'll say, I think some people know all that, what I just said, and they don't care. They just say Christianity is white man's religion anyway because they know the powerful effect it'll have on people. And I think they're just taking cheap shots, some people.
So, wow. Listen, family, I'm going to ask one more question, right? And I'm going to open it up for you guys to come on in and ask questions. Post your questions in the comment section. Otherwise, I will post the link as well. But first of all, comment section, right? So, Vocab, you're telling me, this is hard to believe. So, number one, Christianity is not the white man's religion. Next, you're going to tell me that Christianity isn't a straight copy from Egypt. I've watched a few Zeitgeist films. I've watched a few TikToks and YouTube videos, and, it's just a straight copy from Egypt.
Well, yeah, I guess some people still say that, right? Many things to consider there, many things to talk about there. So if someone's going to make that kind of claim, right? Christianity is a copy basically, I guess the argument is supposed to be Christianity is not true. It's copying from some earlier source. And so since it's derivative, how could it be the original thing or be true? I think that's what people are trying to say by that, right? We have to establish a bunch of things for this argument to work. One is whatever the source is that we're saying was copied from Christians, right? We have to establish that it definitely was before said Christian belief or said Christian practice. That is absolutely essential. The whole thing of the argument is based upon chronology. So if we're going to say, here's this practice, here's this belief, Christians took it and made it their own, it can't be after Christianity. And what you find a lot of times is people will say these kind of claims, and you look at the original, say the first mention of this claim about what Egyptians did or believed, or sometimes it postdates Christianity. Sometimes these people don't know it. Sometimes they just use it as a cheap argument. Or sometimes they'll say, well, yeah, but we know it was reflecting earlier stuff. Well, do we? So that's a key thing. The establishment of the chronology, the timeline is very important in that. And I think a lot of these arguments fall short in that area. Not all of them, but a lot of them do. The other thing is we want to talk about is, don't we have to do some work if we're going to make that claim to show that there was some sort of awareness of borrowing, some kind of conscious awareness of borrowing and a willingness to do that? So it can't just be that, like, well, look, here's a parallel in my opinion, right? Here's a parallel. Doesn't have to be. We have to have some evidence that people were taking this and then reincorporating it. Some people may say, well, we could have no such evidence. Well, I think we could even have a low bar, meaning, okay, we don't expect someone to literally say, I am now copying this religion. I get that. But some evidences. Now, people say there is evidence. You just have to open your eyes. Look at this picture. And that's where you get into really silliness, where you're saying, look at this picture. It proves it. It's like, what? It's a drawing, man. How does that prove anything? But people make these arguments in real life. Well, but we have to be able to do that. I think this is just fair to expect. And there's a lot of problems with it, such as what would the motivation be? These are monotheistic Jews. What would the reasons be? I mean, I feel like with a crime, you need a motivation. And I feel like that's lacking a lot of times as well. And, there's more to say with it. But usually what I found with the claims is the original sources don't say what the person putting forward the argument a lot of times says. And so if it doesn't actually say what you're saying it says, then you don't get to describe it in Christian terms and kind of baptize it and then say, oh, look, it's a resurrection. You'll see that obviously with a certain case of a certain Egyptian god who was chopped up into a lot of pieces and then became god of the underworld. That's not a resurrection. That's not a resurrection. And there's a question about when exactly did that even happen, right? When did that happen? See, these things are kind of located in a galaxy far, far away, meaning I can say, even if somebody wants to debate it, obviously we know Garfield loves to debate this. Jesus was born under the reign of Tiberius Caesar. But at that point, you're putting it somewhere, right? You're saying within this time frame, when did these things even happen? Meaning, now someone would say, well, that's not relevant. They're just borrowing from myths. They're just ripping off myths. The other thing is just the whole actual structure of Christianity, meaning the early literature about Jesus, the non-Christian sources about Jesus, all these things. Well, if Jesus really existed and really had his life, let's say you found something that really looks like a parallel. Well, it could just be a coincidental parallel. This is best case scenario. I don't think really very many of these exist, by the way. I'm just trying to be charitable here. Well, if Jesus really lived and really did these things, then that's just his life. That's just is what it is. It's just what happened. Doesn't mean it was ripped off from anywhere. And, lastly, ripped off from Egypt. People say that. It's like, which version of the myth? You start to look at these Egyptian myths and it's like, there's one from Memphis, there's one from here, there's one from there, and then one becomes popular later. And I just feel like people they very rarely will define it like it's this version of the myth. Here's how Christians could have come in contact with it. They don't do any of that work. It's like, look at this picture or look at the way this word sounds similar, which is such bad argumentation. Words that sound similar, pictures that look similar. And it's almost relying upon honestly, ignorance of the audience sometimes. And they don't just do it with Egypt. My favorite one is probably Mithras. That's a Persian god. They'll say, Mithras, he's being born of a virgin. And you read the accounts about Mithras and it says he emerged from the rock wearing a hat and wielding a knife. Like, I mean, are we going to define the rock as a virgin? Is that what we're saying here? And a lot of them are actually like that. That's just my favorite example, because I guess the rock's a virgin, I guess. But you realize that people are cheating at that point, and they do that sometimes with the resurrection. It's like, no, he just became the god of the underworld. And look how he came back to life. His wife/sister turned into a falcon and then copulated with him. So first of all, that's incest. Second of all, it's bestiality. And third of all, it's necrophilia because he's dead. It's really gross and weird. And that's the way he comes back to life. And you're telling me that's like Jesus' resurrection? Bro, come on, man. Just saying. I'm talking about ISIS, everybody, and what she did. But yeah. So no. And there's interesting debates about this and stuff like that. But I sometimes we can go too far, right? There's certain cultural expressions of Christianity, say I'm in an Egyptian context, that take things from the culture and do subvert or Christianize it, but they're sort of incidental, meaning not something from the account in the New Testament, maybe a practice. For example, certain symbols or gestures or words that are used or things like that. I think that, to me, that's different when you talk about the praxis of something that's incidental, because remember earlier I talked about you're not there to destroy your culture. So there could be things that carry over from your previous culture. And I think that's okay, but that's different than the foundational account of everything. And most people don't even push this anymore. They just really don't push this anymore as far as serious, Now, whenever I say that, it's like I got to qualify everything. In scholarship, there's always somebody who will say something. You can find a PhD to say almost anything on any topic, and I understand that. But I think largely that's true. But I mean, what? I guess you don't believe that Christianity was borrowed from Egypt anymore, or do you?
Never believed that.
Never?
Never, ever believed that.
Your whole life?
I don't think ever believe that Christian. Let me really delve into that. What about Christianity do I think was borrowed from Egypt? Nothing. I would say that there has been cultural borrowings. If we're going to say from that influenced Christianity, would be obviously Judaism. And Judaism was heavily influenced by Egypt and other Near Eastern polities such as Assyria and Persia. So I would say there's been cultural diffusion, but in terms of copying or borrowing, no, never that.
Well, I mean, what you just said there, I think I basically would agree with. The Hebrews were not aliens. They didn't come from Mars with these totally unique forms. They had neighbors, and they interacted with them, and that's just a fact, and that's okay. I mean, you see Moses talking about learning from the wisdom of the Egyptians. The Bible doesn't try to hide it. Where it is, right? And you also see the example with Solomon. Some of those proverbs, clearly Egyptian proverbs, some of the wisdom literature. But it even says, Solomon says, I collected proverbs. It looks like he came up with some, looks like he collected others, and that's just a fact. But that's just part of living in a space and being a human. And definitely the Hebrews did that. And I don't think Christians should have a problem with that reality. I mean, honestly, sometimes I feel bad when I talk about this, because since people go so overboard with Egyptian myths created Christianity or some version of that then we don't get to talk about the positives there. That Egypt was not really Egypt's not always an enemy in the Bible. I mean, yes, there's the plagues and the whole oppression. Okay. But, Joseph was raised up with the Pharaoh in the account of Genesis, and this benefited both parties, and in fact benefited a large number of people in the area. And then they flourished for a long time. Israel's sons there, they flourished. And I believe it was the land of Goshen. They flourished there. It was later when the Pharaoh rose who knew not Joseph, right, that the problems came. But in the meantime, I mean, it's not really described in great detail, but it's essentially hunky-dory, And later on, you can even tell, because even though they weren't really supposed to, some of Israel's kings or Judah's kings would sometimes try to rely on Egypt as an ally. they were like, hey, can we link up again? Yeah, sometimes they fought too, right? I believe Josiah was killed by an Egyptian archer at 39 years old, if I'm not mistaken. But sometimes they would try to lean on them like, hey, can you help us out against Assyria or this guy over here, And so it's very interesting with the relationship. And we don't want to discount Egypt, because if you were around during the Hebrews' day of running around in the wilderness, these ragtag band of people running around the wilderness, and then you looked at Egyptian civilization, you would think, oh, Egypt has it going on. You wouldn't have much hope for the future of these Hebrews. Now, I would say I believe that that's ultimately God's providence and God's sovereignty. And the interesting thing is, pyramids, as great as they are, they don't have really much function today for Egypt or anything. There's just things to look at and marvel. Yet, because Israel, and I say this is because of God, produced and carried and maintained a book, their ideas have influenced the world in a way that is very important and very interesting and very fascinating. And ultimately, again, I say that's because God gave it to them. But can I read one little thing? Because I don't want to bang on Egypt too much. I want to turn to Isaiah 19. And I want to show people this in Isaiah 19. I think this is beautiful here. Now, right before this, God is talking about judging Egypt. So it's there, but I'm not going to read it for sake of time. But look at Isaiah 19, starting in verse 18. In that day, there will be 5 cities in the land of Egypt that speak the language of Canaan and swear allegiance to the Lord of hosts. So there's prophecy that basically got Egypt being down with Yahweh. One of these will be called the city of destruction. In that day, there will be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar to the Lord at its border. It will be a sign and a witness to the Lord of hosts in the land of Egypt. This is the book of Isaiah. This is like 700 years before Jesus, everybody. Understand that. When they cry to the Lord because of oppressors, he will send them a savior and defender and deliver them. And the Lord will make himself known to the Egyptians. And the Egyptians will know the Lord in that day and worship with sacrifice and offering. They'll make vows to the Lord and perform them. And the Lord will strike Egypt, striking and healing, so judging, but yet also recovering. And they will return to the Lord, and he will listen to their pleas for mercy and heal them. Isaiah 19, verse 23. In that day, there will be a highway from Egypt to Assyria, and Assyria will come into Egypt, and Egypt into Assyria, and the Egyptians will worship with the Assyrians. Now remember, the Egyptians are described as worshiping Yahweh there. Now, this is the last 2 verses. In that day, Israel will be the third with Egypt and Assyria, a blessing in the midst of the earth, whom the Lord of hosts has blessed, saying, blessed be Egypt, my people, and Assyria, the work of my hands, and Israel, my inheritance. Now, I think that's powerful because it shows there was always a universal scope of mission that was latent in a lot of the Old Testament, even though sometimes it's not able to be clearly seen or people forget about it. But it was there, and Isaiah 19 is one of those examples, and it lists Egypt in a very favorable way. And I think that's very important to understand because it literally says, Egypt, my people. Egypt, my people. So that's one place. And my understanding is that basically is pointing to the messianic kingdom in which all peoples, of all types of peoples rather, are under the rule of Jesus in a permanent way. I think that's what that ultimately points to, but it's beautiful. Specifically brought out Egypt. So just want to say that before people think I'm banging on Egypt, just because I don't think Jesus was influenced by Isis, Osiris, and Horus.
Actually, let me put forward one, because I know somebody might say, Kalaam, but all right, I'll put forward this then. I would say that although I don't personally think that Christianity is copied from Kemet, I think that there are, accounts from Jews that Jesus, got his teachings on or arts or magical arts from Egypt itself. So there are claims of that going back to the Jews. What do I think? Do I think these claims are true? I don't know, man. I don't know. I think a lot of this stuff is just made up personally. So I'll leave it like that. Let's go.
Well, yeah, there in the Talmud, makes an allegation against Jesus about what you just said.
Yeah.
There are other, by the way, pagan critics. Remember I mentioned Celsus or Celsus. There's other pagan critics who actually ended up saying similar things here. But when you look at the Talmud is not the Torah. It comes from later. From later on. And I believe this is from Tract Sanhedrin. And yeah, I got it up on the screen before me. 107b reads, the teacher said, Yeshu practiced sorcery and corrupted and misled Israel. And then Sanhedrin 104b says, did not Ben Stada bring forth sorcery from Egypt by means of scratches on his flesh? So they're talking about Jesus, by the way. And they're basically saying that Jesus learned magic from Egypt and even cut magical formulas into his skin. That is what that's saying. So you get a similar thing in the Gospels themselves, where the opponents of Jesus say he's demon possessed, and they say that he drives out devils because he himself is basically possessed by a devil, and that's where Jesus says, "How can a house divided against itself stand?" So, the interesting thing about that is it's a polemic against what his opponents perceive to be some sort of power that he has. But basically, in a manner of speaking, instead of saying it's from up here, they're saying it's from down there, And in the case of Egypt, you might say that they're saying it's from right here. So it's a way to discount miracle accounts by Jesus, which is interesting because why would they need to explain that if there's nothing to explain? Why do you need to explain that unless there's something there? But the Talmud is interesting because it wasn't finished until later. So it's post New Testament. However, there's a question about the dates of the source material. And really, scholars try to get to the bottom of it, and it's very difficult to get to the bottom of what layer or strata, meaning how early does it go back. But even if the charge goes back all the way to the days of Jesus himself, let's just say hypothetically, obviously doesn't make it true, but it is an accusation that some of Jesus' opponents did make. It certainly is. It's right there in the Talmud. And, there's a good book called, I think it's called Jesus in the Talmud. I'll have to look up the author, but it's all about these tractates in the Talmud that are very anti-Jesus. Some of them are really, really foul, really messed up, but it's just polemics against Jesus, basically, and one of them is, yeah, he could do miracles because he learned sorcery and magic from the Egyptians. So it's there, but it's very late. And obviously, it's just an accusation from opponent, most likely from opponents who didn't even know him at the time. And we don't see them saying that during his lifetime, although I said they said something similar, meaning you get it from the devil. But even in his lifetime, they weren't saying that. It seems like it's a later development, perhaps for people who then read the New Testament and they saw, these Christians say Jesus went to Egypt at some point. So maybe we'll say he learned magic there. The accusation seems to be past his life when it was created, and may come from a reading of the New Testament itself, which would make it derivative. It's an insult based upon the source documentation we possessed as Christians at that time versus something that was organic in the context, because in the context of the Gospels, it's you're demon possessed. You see what I'm saying? Not you learn magic from pagans.